window. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Alliance Française de Pasadena. I'm Dan Slater, president of the board of Alliance, and I'm here with my colleague, Emma Franks, executive director, and our wonderful French teacher, one of them, Alexandra Moreau, who will be joining me and talking with our special guest tonight, David Hoon Kim, an essayist, translator, critic, and now novelist with his debut novel called Paris is a Party, Paris is a Ghost. And the book cover looks like that with a interesting drawing of the Eiffel Tower. And this book came out in early August, and I was alerted to it actually in July when I read an essay that David wrote for the New York Review of Books that had an interesting title, and it was called, and correct me, David, if I don't quite have it right, living in French, not living in France.
Yeah.
When I lived in
Living in French. And it's about culture, language, identity, and his experiences. And the essay that we'll talk about in a few minutes mentioned that his book was coming out. And his book has been widely reviewed, including in the New York Times Book Review, a very interesting review of it. And just this last Sunday, his book was again mentioned in the New York Times Book Review as one of the recommended books to read this week. So it's a very timely that we have David Hoon Kim with us. And so we wanted to welcome you to Alliance Française de Pasadena, David.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And we'll start with a discussion about the essay that you wrote in the New York Review of Books. And I know you have a passage from it that you'll read. And why don't we start with that, and then we can talk a bit about it.
Okay, sure. So I'm just going to read a short passage from the beginning of the essay, towards the beginning. I started learning French at the age of 19, half a lifetime ago, as an entirely personal choice. One of those fateful and fortuitous encounters that can forever alter the trajectory of a life. Like stories of love at first sight, except that mine was with the language. It might have had something to do with the fact that even before my encounter with French, I never felt that I possessed a language, neither the Korean that was always mine, nor the English that was imposed on me after I immigrated to America with my mother. One I spoke at home, but nowhere else. The other I spoke everywhere but at home. There are things I said in one language, but never in the other. The result of such an arrangement was that both languages felt borrowed, temporary, albeit in different ways and to different degrees. With both, I felt like an actor repeating his lines, pretending to be an American, an Asian American, a Korean American, a Korean, but never quite fitting in anywhere, with any group. Not that I was able to fit in France, which doesn't view national identity in the same ways as the US does. Even if I had acquired French citizenship, even if I had lived there for 50 years as a French citizen, I would not have been accepted in a way that someone after 5, 10, 15 years in America can be accepted as an American. Where I did find acceptance was among a group of aspiring writers, fellow members of a creative writing workshop organized by the Post, a university cultural center of sorts. Outside of the workshop, I would meet up with my newfound friends, each of us taking turns hosting a soirée atelier, as we call them, atelier as in atelier d'écriture, or writing workshop, during which we would try to write something based on a theme one of us had chosen. Could I have met such friends in the US? Probably, but the fact remains that I met them in France. Living in Southern California, where no one I know speaks French, and the closest thing to France is a pastry shop called Paris Baguette in a strip mall. I sometimes question my desire to practice a language I am so thoroughly cut off from, and which seems at times like a futile undertaking, or an invisible fortress I've built around myself. No one seeing me in public would suspect that I live in a francophone world, population 1, composed entirely of books, internet radio, occasional emails, and of course, my own writing in French. Sometimes I feel like the only one of my kind, by which I'm not trying to imply that my love of the French language is unique or special. French isn't exactly a little known language, but I can't help wondering if this is what the last speaker of a language must feel. The loneliness that comes from knowing that there is no one to answer you in your language, or in my case, the language I chose for myself.
Well, now you have a community of French speakers to turn to here at Alliance Française de Pasadena in the future, and I hope you will join us in the future. One of the interesting quotes that I saw that you had in an interview a few years ago was that you said that I speak French and Korean, but do not have, and I'm repeating a little bit of the ideas. I speak French and Korean, but do not have French or Korean nationality, which doesn't keep me from feeling French or Korean, especially when I'm in the US, just as I feel very American when I'm in France. As a result, rather than adhere to a nationality or seek affiliation with a native language, I see myself as an inhabitant of the French language, a denizen of the Korean language, and a citizen of the English language. For me, the bond between language and identity is at once unavoidable, tenuous, and paradoxical. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on this idea of feeling so different in each of the languages that you're, do you feel torn or do you feel gratified, you might say, in being able to have this connection to these three languages? And if so, how do you feel in these three languages?
That's an interesting question. I think just to address your comment about feeling torn or not, I think there was a moment along, like say maybe 10 or so years ago when I did kind of right after the publication of my New Yorker story, because I felt that at that time, relative to now, I think I was still kind of young in my writing endeavors, and so I felt that there was kind of a choice that opened up before me at that moment, which was to continue writing in English or to go back to writing in French, because actually I started writing creatively really in French before I started writing fiction or creatively in English. So in a way, it was at that time, it was me either continuing to write in English or going back to writing in French. And so I did feel a bit torn then. And I think maybe even now, the fact that it takes time to write. So writing in two languages takes more time than writing in one. So yes, it's still maybe still a decision, but I think I don't feel as torn anymore because I maybe I've accepted that I can write in both languages, or I don't, or perhaps it does help also that I've started publishing in French, so which came later than publishing in English, and so there was some validation there. So I guess in relation to 10 years ago, I feel like I am able to do both more than I was able to do both back then. So yeah, I don't feel as torn anymore. And to answer the other part of your question about do I feel differently in different languages? Oh, of course. I mean, I think I chose to write in French, so it's always maybe more of a choice to write in French. It's more of a conscious decision. Although I guess for me, writing in English is also a conscious decision, since writing in English means I'm not spending that time to write in French. So I don't know. I think it's always a conscious decision for me. It's never a given, I guess. Writing is never the question of language is never a given for me. Yeah.
Well, one of the concepts that you have talked about is the difficulty when you're writing in one language and struggling to come up with a word that you know perfectly describes what you want to say, but it's in the other language.
Right.
So, you know, you're writing in English, but that perfect description is a word in French, and vice versa. And how do you deal with that, or does it push you toward a preference for one language than another?
Yeah. It's a bit. Yeah, it is a bit. It can become a bit complicated. I think even when I'm kind of used to it at the same time, because even when I started writing in English, I think it was kind of, I, I was always writing about France. So in a way, I was always having to deal with this problem of trying to translate stuff. And um, with Paris as a Party, I think that I felt, I really felt afterwards that I was translating a book more than writing it. And it was because uh, having to constantly, like you said, describe things in English, that concepts that originally exist in French into English, and yeah, so that was always an ongoing challenge. And it, it, yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned like what happens, what do I do if there is a word in another language, in French, for example, in this case, I guess that it's the perfect word or whatnot, or the perfect expression, or it can even be a cultural context that I would have to translate or explain in English. I think what I ended up doing towards the end was I actually did just translate things, write it out, write the passage in French, translate it into French, and translate it back into English. I actually did that quite a lot, and it allowed me to find things that uh, I would not have said if I just stayed in English. So yeah, in a way, it's kind of like if I can't really fight it, I just kind of gave into the other language, I suppose, in a way, while writing in English. So yeah.
Because there are sentences in the book that where you use French to describe or to make a point or to help the reader understand the moment or what you're trying to say.
Can you give an example?
Well, you know, well, I'd have to thumb through the book, but maybe I'll defer that to Alex to repeat in a better question.
There were also moments where I decided not to translate things too. I don't know if this is what you mean, sort of, but certain things that I put into French that I didn't decide that I didn't translate because I felt the context was sufficiently clear, or and this is also something that I only realized afterwards, but I noticed that like my narrator's tendency to deal with those things changed throughout the book. For example, in the beginning of the book, he kind of scrupulously translates things into parentheses and things like that, or in between dashes. And I noticed that later on in the book, he doesn't do that as much. And it's actually been a couple of years since I wrote the book, so I don't know if that was a conscious decision or if that's changing attitude towards language, towards his the fact that his career as a translator doesn't really go very well. He actually ends up quitting his job. So maybe it kind of reflects that. I like that though. I was kind of, yeah.
Two questions from our audience. One is, when you were writing the book, and I should have mentioned that one of the reasons, or maybe the primary reason you left France, was to attend the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is a very prestigious opportunity, and then followed by the arts fellowship in Provincetown, and where you actually wrote the book, I believe.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, I finished it there.
You finished it there, and did that environment where you're not surrounded by French speakers actually help you focus, or was it a distraction? I guess I'm asking, when you're writing in English or in French and you're in the other culture, does it impede your writing?
It doesn't. I don't. I think generally it doesn't impede it. I think. I think it probably would have helped to be. Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't. Um, there are. I've heard writers say that certain American writers say that he has they have to be in contact with the culture that they're writing about, and but I don't really feel that that's I don't feel that to be true. That said, I think there are actually two two aspects at stake here, which is that I feel that I can write about France better if I'm away from it. So I think that helps to be in a place like Provincetown or Cape Cod, rather than in France writing about France.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, linguistically, I actually was friends with someone there who's French, and so speaking French with her was really, I think that helped. That kind of I'm not sure how that concretely helped me, but I think it definitely made a difference. So.
Yeah, the before we turn to your book, I had one other question I was intrigued about. You end your essay in the New York Review of Books with saying that, and I'm paraphrasing, and you can correct me and read the actual quote if you'd like. It was that you weren't in love with France, but you are in love with French. But how can you separate the two, or can they be separated? And I'll throw that question back to you. Can one separate the language from the culture or the country?
I don't think you can. No, I think it's a question I've always obviously asked myself quite a lot, and uh, but no, I don't think you can. E e Even though for me, France is up, above all a language. I think it's for me that's it's a linguistic environment, but at the same time, I don't think. But it's the environment that created the language, so I don't think you can separate the two. Just like I mentioned in the essay, I kind of ask a sort of rhetorical, theoretical question about um, the good times I had with my friends in France. Would they have been the same if we had spoken English to each other? And that's an impossible question because I think what ultimately in the end what made them my friends was that that, that they spoke French, but at the same time that's not the whole thing for me. So yeah, I guess it's inseparable. I think it's impossible.
And the while you were in France, the struggle may not be the right word, but I'll use a struggle for identity that you describe from others, maybe disbelieving that you could be French. And here you are, so fluent that your friends are turning to you for grammatical answers and corrections, and uh, and yet there's skepticism. I guess I would say skepticism by members of the public about uh, could you really be French?
So the paradox, the contradiction between the two.
Yes. Well, and just what your thoughts are about that conundrum.
I mean, just to address the public, I mean, I think, uh, I mean, the public, not the quote unquote disbelief from the public. It was just it was linked to race, obviously, and so I think that would have existed no matter whether I spoke French well, badly, or not at all. I think that wouldn't have made any difference. So, um, and in yeah, so I don't think it had anything to do with my abilities or lack thereof in French. So, and yeah, I think that kind of, I don't know if that answers the question. Um, and yeah, and I also don't want to make it seem like I was like correcting my French friends all the time or anything like that. It was once in a while someone they would get stuck on a word and I would know it, but obviously, um, for example, the gender of words, I'm sure they knew that a lot better than I did, having learned French in childhood, where you learn the genders in grade school. I so I don't have that inherent knowledge of having learned it then. It's not like ingrained into, um, yeah, for example, in the same way that, for example, in English, that syllable you put the emphasis on in English, which I think someone who learned English later on wouldn't have that ingrained in the similar way, I suppose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, one other question that we received, an interesting one about when you dream. Do you dream in English or French? Do you think in English or in French? Or perhaps the answer to both questions is both.
Um, it's kind of funny, like, not that I'm comparing myself to him, but Nabokov, when asked that question, would answer that he doesn't think in any language, he thinks in images. And yeah, but get back to me, I think yeah, when I'm writing in French, I think in French. When I'm writing an email in French, I think in French. When I'm writing an email in English, I think in English. And yeah, I do. Um, I think there was a period last couple of years, like maybe a while back, when I didn't dream as much in French, but I think now that I've really writing more in French, I dream more in French. I think the rest of the time I dream in English, obviously, because it's the language that I use all the time. So it's impossible not to dream in English. And every once in a while, I'll dream in Korean. So there's that too. Yeah.
Well, you're more likely if you're with the environment you're in to be dreaming in English in Costa Mesa rather than living in France in that environment. That's for sure. We want to turn to your book, and again, it's Paris is a Party. Paris is a Ghost, available at Vroman's, and I found it so interesting that your protagonist slash narrator was Danish, an adoptee from Japan as a baby, raised in Denmark, and sees himself as thoroughly Danish, and has that is confronted with that background on many occasions. And before I turn to Alex, my question would be why your choice of a Danish narrator who was adopted from Japan. I mean, I get obviously the connection to your own life as someone who came as a baby to the United States from Korea. Your parents emigrated here. You grew up here, and so you had your foot in those two cultures. As your narrator has a foot in France and his first foot in Japan and a second foot in Denmark, it had to lead you to research Denmark and the Danish language, because there's certainly references to that. Tell us your choices there.
Yeah, as you said, I did do a bit of research, not that much, but enough to kind of make it believable. Actually, my narrator came to the U.S. Came to Denmark as much earlier than I did. I actually came when I was 8. So, and in a way, like I think I made him Danish and a Japanese adoptee to kind of put distance between him and me, so that he's not so that it can be so that he can be of Japanese ethnicity and not Korean, for example, so that it's not 100% different, but at the same time it's not just a transposition of me in a novelistic form. So and I think I also made him Danish because the fact that he's both Asian and Danish makes him, I think, a double minority. He's minority in terms of he speaks a very minority language, and he's minority by the color of his skin. Because I guess in a way I feel like I'm a double minority in the sense that on top of belonging to an ethnic minority in the U.S., I'm also I guess my appropriation, for lack of a better word, of the French culture kind of makes me not really fit in with the Korean American community either, or the Korean community. So yeah, I was just trying to reflect that. And also, yeah, just the fact that I didn't want to write another story about an American abroad in France, and there are some great stories featuring that. Hemingway, of course, is the most famous example, but I didn't want to fall into the same trope. I wanted to try something different, so that's kind of why I made him not an Anglophone in Europe. So that was my other reason for making him Danish. So.
And that to me made it doubly interesting because it was not as you say, your typical Anglophone traipsing around Paris. But something that we haven't seen before.
Right. I'm glad you appreciated that.
Yeah. And Alex, I know you have some interesting observations about the book as well.
Yes. Actually, the one about the choice of being Danish was one that had also occurred to me recently. Yes, I just wanted to say how much I loved the book to start, David. And I think having grown up with a couple of languages in my family, and then having lived in various countries, and so feeling like, you belong everywhere and nowhere, even when you end up speaking the language. That kind of sense of fragmented identity was extremely, really spoke to me. I really loved the book. I wanted to start with something pretty kind of obvious, but I was struck by the title of your book, and how clear it was. Like, it was almost like an extremely straightforward explanation of what to expect. Paris is a party. Paris is also a ghost. And I was wondering whether that was always an obvious choice to make it that
title.
That clear. Yeah, the title of the book.
I think it's hard to remember when I came up with it, but I think I came up with it maybe halfway through writing it. I wrote it over the course of, I actively worked on it over the course of about 2 years, and I think maybe I came up on it halfway through it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
And what was it? So was it an obvious choice? Was it an easy one once it came up? Was it pretty clear that, you were comfortable with it, really truly announcing what to expect in terms of themes in the book?
Do you mean where I came up with title, perhaps?
Yes, actually, how you came up with it, or how it came to you, rather. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, it's actually a composite of two titles, two different, I guess, literary references. The first one I think is it's Hemingway's famous book, Paris une fête.
Mm-hmm.
It's a translation back into English of that.
Mm-hmm.
Paris is a Party, and then the other half is actually from a poem by Anne Carson, which I quote that in the book about I think in towards the end of the third section, and it's a great poem, and it has that line, Paris is a ghost, and yeah, so I just kind of combine, and I like the very unlikely pairing between Hemingway on the one hand and Carson on the other, two people I think most people wouldn't use in the same sentence. So, and you know, translating a French title, the French title of an English book back into English, that kind of spoke to me as like something Henrik is doing in the book. So I liked how those things all work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The part played by the two cities in the book, so obviously Paris, but also Rome, and I felt like Rome really came across almost like a kind of like a film décor, comme un décor de cinéma. Like it felt almost a little bit unreal. And I felt that the way Paris is portrayed in the book also feels a little unreal. And I was thinking about the feelings of loneliness, of solitude that big cities often exacerbate. And it doesn't matter which big city you go to, they can often trigger that sort of feeling. And I was thinking, obviously, Paris feels like one of the characters of the book, but I thought, could it have taken place anywhere else? Could it have been in any other big city?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know like another city. I don't know another city as well, so I don't think I could have said it in another city with as much, I guess, personal feelings, because I think for me it's a portrait of Paris at a certain moment in time. So seen through, I guess, seen through my eyes in a way, because I mean it's kind of the Paris I knew, early 2000, that era of Paris. So I think I mean, technically, I suppose that could have taken place. But once again, it's hard for me to say that because I don't actually know, for example, Berlin very well. So I don't know if, I guess it's not physically impossible, right? There are foreign students there. There are translators there. So, I mean, I don't see why not. Yeah, so.
There was obviously the personal connection to that city, right. Not just those feelings. Yeah.
And it's and at the same time, I wasn't trying to, in my book, create this very intricate and excruciatingly detailed recreation of Paris like you often see in historical novels, which are often heavily researched. But so I wasn't. I mean, for me, it's very particular. I mean, all of those, movie posters he sees, the brand of frozen vegetables, things like that. I mean, those are all French references. So I don't think that would have been. I guess I could spend a long time trying to research those things for another city, but I just then it wouldn't have meant anything to me. So I think. Yeah, so I think. Yeah, so I think.
The feeling that well, obviously that I got as a reader was very much what you described, that it is Paris, but it's not. It's not a Amélie Poulain Paris, or it's not a postcard Paris. It felt very much like we were in France, but at the same time, and that, I feel like that, to me, that was the fascinating aspect, that we could have also been at the same time somewhere else, and maybe that kind of mirrored also what was going on in Henrik's mind, or inside his head, and the pulling between who he is and what.
But do you think, just to ask you a question, do you think a movie like Amélie Poulain could have taken place in another city, or do you think that could only have taken place in Paris?
No, that's why I felt like your book wasn't the Amélie Poulain, the Paris of Amélie Poulain, because I feel like Amélie Poulain was very much wanting to create that feeling, whereas in your book I felt like we were floating in a Paris that maybe existed inside of Henrik's mind. So that was both kind of French and not French at the same time. So maybe his own brand of what Paris or France was or is.
But at the same time, having that floating, you might say, in a way makes it easier for the reader to connect, because you could see that this could occur in Los Angeles, or it could occur in people that you might know in various places who don't live their lives as perhaps the central character in their own life, but seem to be an appendage on other people's lives, or to other people's lives, that they're finding their identity through other people, through people they encounter, through people they follow, through people who ask one to be the godfather of the child, or what have you. That they're trying to find their identity by these friends, or by these connections to other people, but they seem to be more outsiders in their own life, of their own life, because they're constantly defining who they are by reference to others, if that makes sense. Maybe it didn't make sense. But that's what I thought of the narrator Hendrik, because he was trying to did have these connections to people, but he was always looking outward at these others, and how he was reacting to these others, and how he was dealing with these others, and was seemingly defining his life by reference to these others. And he wasn't necessarily the central character of his own life. These other people were the central character of his own life. I don't know if Alex or David, you had that view of Hendrik, the central character of the book.
Yeah, I definitely think, I think there is a side of a part of him that is kind of living in the margins, kind of, that he, and that's why he tries to implicate himself in the life of his best friend, René, and tries to be a godfather to his child, because I guess the question the reader could ask is, why doesn't he just have a child of his own, right? So, and things like that. And I think maybe there's kind of like a something that's keeping him from doing it, something that kind of maybe a barrier of sorts. But yeah, I think when you mentioned that, he is kind of not in this. He's not. He's trying to be the central figure of his own life, and it's not always obvious to him. Yeah, so I think definitely.
I was wondering also whether Patrick Modiano had been an influence at all on your writing, if you knew of him, or if you had read anything by him.
Yeah. I read several of his novels. I think, yeah. So an influence. I wouldn't say that he's a writer that I go back to again and again, but I do read his novels and I do enjoy them, and I definitely see that there's a certain mood that I respond to in his writing. So, but I think consciously he's not a writer that I try to imitate. I think there are writers I'm aware that I'm trying to imitate when I'm writing, but I guess he's not one of them as far as I can tell. So.
Not consciously. So in the book, the characters have seem to kind of come across as kind of fragmented or made of multiple parts, whether with language or their cultural upbringing, or and I was wondering whether you saw this as a power in someone, whether being made of so many multiple parts, even if sometimes they don't, it can be a battle to make them fit in. Whether for you that was, it's something almost like a superpower or power of some kind.
In terms of Henrik and his, do you just mean?
Yes, Henrik, the fact that, so for example, Henrik, whether the accumulation of languages and the accumulation of, the experience of being elsewhere and his upbringing, whether that kind of adds to him. Does it make him special to be that way?
I think he doesn't really feel that. I don't think he feels very special at all. I think he feels almost disadvantaged compared to the people around him who seem to know who they are, for example, or don't ask those questions.
And how do you see that? Do you agree with how Henrik feels, or is it something that you kind of also feel can be seen as a disadvantage, or not?
I mean, I understand where he's coming from, but at the same time, I don't see it as a disadvantage. I mean, having several cultures, I think, is definitely not a disadvantage. So but at the same time, it's always a series of choices when you're issued from several cultures. I think it's always an ongoing kind of decision in life. So that's kind of what I feel. I mean, as a person, I mean, I'm just talking about myself, I guess, rather than my character or the book. But I've never actually felt though that, I mean, if you want to know what I think personally, I've never felt that it was at the same time that I had this, that someone like that has power, that it is I don't know, maybe to get a job where you need to speak several languages, then you have an advantage. But I think otherwise, I don't think that. I think above all, I think it's better to. I think one always feels better when one belongs to a group, and I think it's impossible to feel like I'm speaking for myself that I belong to a group when you have a place in another group. So yeah. So, but not to get too much. Yeah. So I think to go back to my character, yeah, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. That's it. I've done my questions, Dan.
Okay. Well, it leads me to as a follow-up that this character certainly doesn't, in my mind, certainly doesn't feel grounded in a comfortable spot culturally, because he's constantly confronted with being Danish, not typically looking Danish, as what, you know, stereotypically Danish. Yet here he is in Paris, but not Parisian. And so, you know, what is, he could ask himself, what is he? What is he culturally? And you know, it's nice to, and I think it's wonderful when you have, you know, take your 2 feet and have one in one culture and one in another culture, and in this case, a 3rd foot in another culture, and draw upon all of that. But I could see in your character also confusion that it produces. Is that a sentiment, David, you would agree with or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, I think I can see how I can understand how he feels that. I mean, after I did actually, I mean, since I wrote it, but at the same time, I think at the same time, I don't really know where that comes from, why I wrote him like that after the fact, retrospectively. I don't know what my thought process was in making him such a, I don't know, a confused soul, I guess. But at the same time, I'm sympathetic to it. So yeah, I think I like to think that no one is completely sure of everything of his own identity at every moment in time. So I think maybe most people do go through that kind of thing, maybe not in that exact same order or the exact same way, but yeah. So yeah, hopefully it kind of speaks to that a little bit.
And I in reading to the end of the book, I at the very end still was questioning: is this ending on a hopeful note, or on a just a not necessarily less than hopeful, but that he would just continue on in the same vein? Or maybe
yeah,
it's left to the reader to
yeah, I think
figure
it's better.
that out.
Yeah, I won't.
Cleverly so, if that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah. However you want to read it, I think is fine. Yeah. I wouldn't want to impose my own view on that. So
yeah. I will ask if any of our participants had a question or two they'd like to throw out. Louise Gandhi, yes.
Okay. Oui, bonsoir. I have not read the book, but I definitely will get it and read it now after this discussion. I am from Quebec. So I grew up in Canada, moved to the US. I write a journal. I always wonder, should I write in French or English? And I do both. And I dream mostly in French and I count in French, not in English. But in any case, one thing I have been thinking about is and I used to teach cultural geography. And so I used to ask my students a lot of questions about their sense of cultural identity. And many of them came from 2 different ethnicities, let's say. You know, Mexican American, Asian American, Chinese American, Korean American, Quebecois American, and so on. And we have in this group tonight many people who belong to two cultural groups, at least maybe three. And it's a difficult thing to resolve, because at one level you feel you don't belong to one and you don't belong to the other. I go to Quebec. I have a hard time with people criticizing the Americans. You know, I come here, I have a hard time anyone making comments about Quebec. I go to France, it's a whole different dimension. So, and I had many students telling me the same thing. They would go to Mexico and defend the US to their Mexican family and come back here and so on and so forth. So there is a struggle for identity, but as I grow older, I think there is a place for, in my mind, to be a world citizen, and that more and more people belong to multiple cultures because of their parents and where they live and the languages they speak. So I don't know if how you think about that, this concept of world citizens. In other words, do you view having multiple cultural identities more of a struggle, or are you hopeful that we're going into a place where national identities or national cultures are no longer the primary defining factor of one's identity? So I'm not sure how. Are you optimistic about this?
I think it depends on the place, the country you're in. I think at the same time, something that you can't really ignore in that question is the hegemony of English. I think so. I think even if you are a part of multiple cultures, those multiple components of your culture are never equal. And so the way I see it is, it's never to me, one of the most defining characteristics of being a part of multiple cultures is that those cultures of mine are never equal. And I'm always, for me, it's a struggle to try to maintain the ones that, in my current situation, which would be my French background and my Korean background, which I always have to fight to not have fade into the background in a way. And so, at the moment, I've started publishing in French. Actually, my first French story was published in a Quebecois review. So, and I continue to publish in other Quebecois reviews, and now I've started publishing in French reviews. So yeah, so I think I don't feel as I don't know what the word is, silent, but at the same, but it's always a struggle, I guess. So I don't feel very optimistic, to be honest, but I've never been a very optimistic. I think I'm more a pessimist, but yeah. So and something that kind of frustrates me also is that in the U.S., cultural identity is never really linked to linguistic identity as it is in other countries. It seems to me. It seems like so, and that has been a source of frustration to me, because I think you are. I think it's really hard to be, for example, Korean without speaking Korean. So I think what makes you Korean is you speaking Korean, and so that for me, and I think that's not really a shared view in the U.S. It's not a mainstream view. So that kind of frustrates me too. But yeah. So
yeah, Catherine has a question. Go ahead, Catherine. You have to unmute yourself.
Désolé, comment question, but is the fact that the book is set in Paris, takes place in Paris, and we are talking about identity and culture and language and so on. So Paris has always been a place that attracted and kept often people from all around the world, from different languages and cultures, frequently artistic writers and so on, musicians, who came to Paris. And that created, I lived there for 8 years myself as a native English speaker, American expatriate. And what was fascinating, and I don't know if your book touches on this much, I was interested in the book for that reason, to see if it reflected it, is the world of the many worlds of the expatriate communities in Paris and their connections with the Français de souche, the native French, or particularly Parisians living there and their friends and so on, which I think makes it a special situation related to Louise's concept of world citizenship. I believe firmly that that is what's happening, and you can see it happening, but very often in Paris because of the interconnections of all the French-speaking expatriate communities. Is there a Korean expatriate community in Paris, and do they all know each other?
Yeah, there definitely is, and in fact, a lot of the characters in my book are from that Korean community in Paris, of which there is quite a. It's not as big as the Chinese or Vietnamese communities, but there is definitely a Korean community, and I actually knew when I lived there.
Mm-hmm.
I was friends with them, so I was friends with a number of them. So yes, and that's something that I wanted to talk about. That's something that I wanted to depict in the book, which I did because I didn't really see that in other books.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think Catherine, you would enjoy.
I'll bet I would.
That aspect of the book. And the
yeah,
book,
I was looking forward to it
as well.
Yeah, just like the third aspect, you bring in the race as well. So you had the racial distinction and the language differences. So most of my friends, when I was an expatriate in Paris, were actually Black American expatriates living in Paris. So they had like this triple consciousness going and identity, the French language, the American, culture, and then being African American as well. And it makes for some fascinating discussions.
And that is reflected in
Great.
the
I'll
book,
read
and I think
I can't wait.
You'll enjoy it. We've come to the end of our hour, and I wanted to thank all of you for being with us. Absolutely, please. The floor is yours, David.
Yeah, I actually promised my. Actually, I just wanted to say a short word about yes. So I mentioned earlier that I do write fiction in French, and so I had a recent story published in a French review called Brève, and so I just wanted to kind of put in a word for them, and just to kind of so if anyone out there is interested in reading short stories in French, which is actually it's a very already in the U.S. short stories are not very center stage. It's all about the novel and so on and nonfiction. But in France, the situation is actually 100 times worse. So there are several organizations, I think, who are trying to kind of like in France trying to kind of promote the short story. And this magazine has been around since 1977. So for a review that publishes only short stories, I think they're one of the most oldest, the most venerable. So I can type in. So if anyone is interested in ordering issues from them, it's like €5. It's very cheap per issue. So and the writing, I've read several issues and it's really great. So if you are into short stories in French, I can put in the I could just put in their website right now in the chat function. I don't know if I can just do that.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat. Everybody will see it, and that's easy to do. I think you just have to click on chat and type away.
Okay, let me just try to. There we go. Question. Okay.
We lost your.
Oh no. We
No,
also have nothing in the chat, do we?
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Oh no, we lost him totally.
Oh no, he's still there.
Oh.
We just lost his.
Oh, I see.
He took himself off video. We'll make sure that. There we go. So I hope all of you can see that, and SCOPALTO. scopalto.com/review/brev, BREVES. And we can also make note of that. And yes, thank you for your website too, David Hoon Kim.
Yeah, I just put it up there because if anyone wants to read an excerpt from my contribution to the latest issue of that review I just mentioned, you can read like the first page or two on my website. The link is to that. The link is to the story if anyone's interested.
Very good.
So.
And when did that come out, David?
Yeah, that story just came out like a month or so ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what is next on your agenda? What can we look forward to?
Just working on several projects. I can't really. It's kind of vague. Also, that's kind of why I can't say, because I'm just kind of juggling several things at once. And yeah.
Sure. Well, we thank you very much for your time. It was fascinating. The book again is Paris is a Party, Paris is a Ghost. There we go. And it's gotten multiple great reviews, and we thank you for joining us to talk about also your essay in the New York Review of Books, which, by the way, if people went to the New York Review of Books website, you can find his essay on their website. You might have to sign up for a free account to access it, but it's very well worth reading. I found it fascinating, and that's what led me to contact David to join us tonight. Thank you again, David. We really appreciate it, and we wish you well, and we thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next cultural event, which will be coming up on October 1st. So please check us out at afdepasadena.org, and we'll lead by, again, thanking David Hoon Kim for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.